Well, good evening. Again, my name is Holly Moore, and I teach 5th grade at Butler Elementary in Paso, and it is such an honor to be here tonight to share my experience of diving into NGSS. So what does that mean? Well, how did I get here? This is how I got here. I've been a part of the California Math and Science Grant for over 6 years, with the last 3 years focusing on NGSS. And what did I learn during this time? Well, I learned that the NGSS standards lend themselves to integrate into our language arts with science. And that is what I did. So the last summer, I sat in our summer institute, and yes, teachers do work during the summer, just to clarify. I sat there and I thought, I can do this in my classroom. This is not a problem. I want to do this. So I went back to the district that I work for, Paso, and I talked to the CAO and the curriculum director, and I said, hey, what do you think about me piloting this program and integrating our language and science together? And I got the thumbs up. So I spent the rest of the summer creating a scope and sequence, and I integrated our pacing guide that we use in Paso Robles. And so I started by taking all the research that I learned during the Summer Institute, and I started collecting information to bring back to my class. So I started with the moon exploration. Who doesn't want to learn about the moon? How cool is the moon, right? So I did follow the five E's: engage, explore, and explain, elaborate, and evaluate. So what we did was that I had the guiding question: does the moon change shapes? Well, in our exploration, the students discovered that, oh yeah, it does. It does change. And what they were doing during these observations was that they just every night would go home and they would make their observations, record the information, and come back and share what they saw. Of course, I heard from parents, do you know that this moon journal is really interrupting bedtime? But the parents were excited because their kids were sharing what they were learning with them. So along with this journal that they created, they also went through 8 centers, and those centers revolved around reading and writing and just really diving into the content. So some of the labs that you'll see on here, they'll be from different lessons that we did. But in this particular lesson, the students used a model and they were simulating the moon phases. And it really was a powerful thing because they started talking about what they were seeing as they were moving around. And they recorded their observations in their science journals. So we spent a lot of time in labs, getting that engagement, getting them excited about what we were talking about. Well, we also have to make sure that they understand what it is that they're doing. So I selected a lot of stories that pertain to what we were talking about. And one of the stories was Galileo. Now, those of you that had open court, you probably know what that story is, or maybe not. But the interesting thing is that in years past when I have taught this story, it was like pulling hair because the kids really didn't understand it. Why didn't they understand what was happening? But when we read this, after the month of investigation and engagement that they had, they were so engaged, they understood it. Most of the kids passed the test with flying colors. No problems. They wanted to know more about Galileo. They wanted to know about his telescope and the lenses that he used. It was such an amazing experience that I was so excited to see their engagement in all of this. It also helped to clarify misconceptions. It was very interesting. A student says, Mrs. Moore, if we were an astronaut and we were going to the moon, how do they figure out when to land on the moon if it's not always full? Well, that's a great question, but let's see if we can investigate and find out how that happens. Well, at the end, of course, he could explain, and he kind of felt a little silly about it, but it's those types of misconceptions that we as educators need to make sure that we can weed out so that they understand what we're trying to get across. So again, like I told you, they use science journals. They use it to record and reflect on what they've learned. They've also used it to write down their observations, and they also use it as reference. So a lot of times when we are reading a story, they're like, do we need to have our science journal out today? Is that something that we need to have out on our desk? And now, at this point of the year, they don't even ask because they know it needs to be out on their desk. So some more exploring and explaining. They were looking at shifts in their shadows, and they made observations to see how their shadow moved throughout the day. They reported it in a write about, and then they shared out with the class at the end. The biggest thing that I have been so excited about seeing, it brings tears to my eyes actually when I think about it, is that these children are becoming so passionate about what they're learning that they're starting to teach each other. They're reading the content. They're diving into their understanding of, and they're becoming problem solvers. So for me, as their teacher, I've become more of a facilitator. I help guide them. I don't give them the answer and they know it. They have to look into finding out what the solution is. But that's the big thing that we as educators need to do. So we also collected data. So I did a lot more with language arts, but I wanted to make sure that I got our math in there as well. So a lot of times we collect data and we don't do anything with that information. But we used the information that we collected, and we were looking at daylight. How much daylight does Paso Robles get, and how much daylight does Fairbanks, Alaska? Because we happened to read a story about the amount of daylight that Alaska receives. So we had graphed both of those data, and then on a big butcher paper, I said, okay, now we need to put all this together. And I want you to just look and observe. What do you see? And they started calling out a bunch of things. And what they realized was that there was specific times of the year that we had similar amount daylight, same amount of daylight. Why is that happening? They started asking and wondering, why is that happening? I don't get that. Fairbanks, Alaska is really far from us. Well, what they realized was that those were the solstices. And so with having our language arts really solidified, having them hands-on with the content, they're like, oh, I get that. So that was just one way of evaluating their understanding. Another way that I've used is to have them write a book. So the big thing is they have kindergarten buddies. They had to keep in mind the audience in which they were writing the story. A kindergarten buddy is not going to necessarily know all the terminology that you've been using, although I'm going to expect it to be in your book. And so they're like, well, how are we going to do that? Well, what have we been learning? How about use context clues to help describe what you're doing? And so the children wrote these amazing stories that they then went over and shared with their kindergarten buddy. And I'm going to tell you, I have not seen such proud students as I did when they presented those books to those kindergarten kids. It was pretty empowering. So now we're moving into weather. In California, do we normally have very much weather? No, but wow, how lucky this year's been. So they have recorded their logs, and they have read numerous stories about weather and how the atmosphere in the clouds and all of those interact with one another. And from this recording, they have begun podcasting weather forecasts. So every day, I choose 2 students, and they know their days, and they look at the national weather map. They forecast what they think as far as the highs and the lows, how that's integrating into the weather and what the temperature is. They have to tell me the dew point, and they are having an amazing time. Now, the great thing about this is now I send out, we record it first thing in the morning. I send it out to all the teachers at my school site, and then they share it with their students. So it's becoming this powerful moment where the kids are saying, wow, this is so great. A 3rd grade teacher just told me they just finished a unit on climate. And so she's like, this is going so great with what you're sending. And the kids are so proud of themselves. So I've talked a lot about all the wonderful things that has happened since I've dove into NGSS and integrated these 2. Of course, for me, there's been a lot of challenges just collecting all the things that I need, but it's been going fine. Lab materials for elementary students have been difficult, but I think the biggest challenge that I've seen is the shift in thinking. Shift in thinking from our students' perspective, in that teachers aren't going to give them the information that they're used to. Shift in teachers, really, that we don't have to open up a book to teach the content. That we can create it and give our students power and, I think, deeper understanding of content. And a shift for administrators as well. That it's not just, let's get this new textbook adoption and create this planning guide, and here you go, have a good time, teach the students. So that's been a shift, I think. So the positives. Parents are going crazy. They love it because their children are coming home and they're talking about science. And not just, oh yeah, we did science. They're talking about all the things that we've been doing in class. They not only talk to one another, they talk to their younger and older siblings. They are talking with friends when they come over and to their house. And the parents are just elated. They're like, they have never talked about science as much as they have since they've been in your class. Also, this warms my heart. I have more girls now that want to be scientists, which is awesome. And of course, increased student engagement has been #1. So I wrote this quote down: tell me and I'll forget, teach me and I will remember, but involve me and I will learn. And that's what my kids have shown me. So in conclusion, if you're thinking about integrating language arts with science, dive in, because the water is great. Thank you.